The favorite part of my day, I kind of like the mornings. I didn't used to be a morning person, but to do construction, you kind of have to be a morning person because a lot of our work starts before most people are out of bed. And it helps us beat the traffic in, especially like big deliveries, things like that. Just, make sure everybody's showing up that's supposed to be there that day, getting everybody lined up. It's kind of excitement. It was about this time 2 years ago, we interviewed against some of our competition about the Mallory project. Schmidt was looking for a general contractor. We had a PowerPoint presentation on the building, a little bit of the back history and things like that. So immediately I got home that night, I started looking up on the internet what they used to do there, and I was like, whoa.
The site at 3029 East Washington, just 2 miles from downtown, has long been a humming center of activity. But to look at it at the end of the 19th century, you wouldn't know. Except for a few key landmarks and a smattering of homes, much of Indianapolis's Near East Side lived up to the name Rural, a nearby cross street of East Washington. And then, in early 1900, sounds began to fill the air. A wooden grandstand was going up at Washington and Gray Streets. Washington Park was an experiment. Would Indianapolis have the fan base to support professional baseball?
I mean, my God, can you imagine being 10 years old and knowing where they were building a major league type ballpark? You were going to be down there as often as you could be. Well, you wanted to get out of your chores, didn't you?
Among those children was Owen Doney Bush, who grew up in the Englewood neighborhood before becoming one of the best shortstops of baseball's dead ball era Detroit Tigers.
Didn't need a lot of equipment to play baseball, and so on the east side of Indianapolis, where the kids were poor, they could play baseball anytime they wanted to with a stick and a ball that they found,
The park housed 2 Indianapolis teams in its 5 years. In 1902, the Indianapolis Indians were one of 8 teams to usher in a new league, the American Association. The Indians went on to become the first league champions that year. Local fans were important to the team's success. They led a parade to the 1902 season opener, but city ordinances didn't accommodate all fans.
When Washington Park was built, it was mainly a place that catered to, business people, and the Sunday baseball ban kind of kept families from going.
Even some players' families. George Kim, the Indians' first baseman, was from a family of German immigrants. Like most working-class families at the time, they worked Monday through Saturday.
Bottom line was, yes, there would have been an ethnic mix there, but it would have still have been almost all white.
Baseball in the days of Washington Park was different from how we know it today. For instance, out-of-the-park home runs were very uncommon, partially because the distance to center field was a whopping 560 feet. If the field still existed today, its outfield would be over 100 feet longer than that of any major league park.
But ultimately, it really was a temporary structure. And after they played there in 1902, 1903, and 1904, they decided it was time for a better, bigger park, that Indianapolis would support baseball.
The Near East Side has a long tradition around community organizing. And it's kind of common belief that we can come together and figure out how to solve big problems in our neighborhood. And we got lots of complexities, we got lots of problems, but we also have vision for what our community is.
I don't think we really paid a whole lot of attention to the Pierre Mallory site until probably around 2005, 2006. It was really only then that we were looking around the community and trying to think through where are places where additional good work can happen.
That was a moment where we began to think that perhaps we can regain our footing as a community. Washington Street was vacant, old industrial. The only thing that really stood out to me was that damn large smokestack, and kind of like a building that you could say, that must have been something in the day. If we could get PR Mallory a new life that contributes to our community, man, that would be a big win.
Wonder for how much longer we'll have this kind of view.
Right.
What will become of all this?
By then, grassroots organizations with decades-long histories on the Near East Side had been developing new capacities to work together for over a decade. Childcare, affordable housing, education, and community and workforce development all emerged as neighborhood priorities compatible with their organizational gifts. Englewood Community Development Corporation and Daystar Childcare formalized the efforts of Englewood Christian Church in these areas.
If anyone here that has a potential of moving into the buildings, you will have a great time. They will treat you with respect. Like I said, everywhere there's a problem, but they know how to solve it.
When I came to Englewood CDC, it was, I think, the first time that I really saw and appreciated the dedication that people had for a neighborhood. I loved that people lived in the neighborhood and could walk to work and had a history with their neighborhood. And I really wanted to be involved with a group like that. And since this was the first place that I learned that, I figured that it was a good place to start.
It is truly a privilege to get to come back to the Near East Side and celebrate the work of the neighborhood. And every time we're here, we seem like we're getting a little bit closer to the property across the street. And so I'm hopeful that this time next year we'll be standing on the parking lot celebrating the rebirth of maybe the signature project of the Englewood neighborhood.
Well, there have been probably a dozen different proposals for how to use various parts of that campus. So we've been all over the map until we've kind of settled in on this one.
After its baseball days, before the land at Washington and Gray could sit empty for long, developers purchased it to serve as Indianapolis's third amusement park.
Oftentimes the parks were owned by the people who also owned the streetcars, and so it made sense for them to drive people on their investment out to another way to make money off of that investment. But then also the parks could use the electricity to run their lights and their mechanized rides at the parks.
Wonderland Amusement Park, which charged 10 cents admission for adults and 5 cents for children, opened on May 19, 1906. It took 2 hours just to admit the 8,000 who showed up for opening night. Among the attractions were stunt cyclists, dance halls, cigar-smoking bears, and a 125-foot electric tower.
Those amusement parks, they were kind of a replication of everybody's industrial working life, riding streetcars. Well, at the amusement park, you rode a big streetcar that went down a log flume, or a train that went up over the treetops. But it was basically the same machinery. It just was transferred to this kind of garden-looking atmosphere.
But not everyone was welcome.
Black people could work there. Black people could be entertainers there, but they couldn't attend the park.
Community organizing was alive and well on the Near East Side in 1909 when attendance started to dwindle at the park.
Mothers of all of the local grade schools got together and took a petition around to not allow Wonderland to open a German beer hall, which worked. They dropped getting the liquor license, but it created kind of a bad feeling, I think, for a lot of people here locally that had gone on, and I think that was kind of the beginning of the end for Wonderland.
By 1911, the park was only open for special events. For the first time, an ad for Wonderland appeared in the Indianapolis Recorder. The park would open for the African American chapter of the Knights of Pythias to celebrate the last night of their national convention.
So they went to the park, they had their parties, they played their games, and then they left, and about 1 o'clock, a fire was discovered by the night watchman.
The park burned completely to the ground.
The newspapers never said that they suspected arson. I think it was probably foul play, probably by someone who was unhappy that they had let the Black community rent the park for that.
One of the big things that I remember doing a couple months after I got here was working on the new market tax credit application for PR Mallory. I was given this long application and this building that I didn't really know much about and said, here you go, fill this out. We're going to go for these new market tax credits for this building.
Make sure they know that tax credits are instrumental to the financing of the project.
Many people that I've talked to have said this project has the most complicated financial stack that they've ever worked on. And then if you talk to some of the folks at Brandt Construction, they would say that this has been the most complicated construction project that they've ever worked on. From the environmental contamination on site to 2 different buildings with different uses for different users on different timelines with different architects. It will, it's kind of a miracle.
Well, Joe called and asked to have a conversation with me and he said, I need some advice on PR Mallory. He kind of just laid out everything they're dealing with. I saw that there was an opportunity here. Help Englewood lead, but play an important role in helping get them there. And so I think at the time we thought it would probably take about 6 months or so to get the financing together, and Englewood is a plucky bunch of people, and they're not going to give up. That 6 months turned into being a 3 or more year commitment. We thought we had figured it all out, so we started construction on the whole project, and started putting in our own money, and Englewood put in their own money, and we borrowed money from anybody who would give us money, and we were even on our own center's line of credit. I've never been so scared in my life, but we believed so strongly in the importance of this project for our community. This was one we were willing to kind of push the chips in and say, we're all in on this.
Lots of different things came up that just delayed and delayed and delayed closing. I thought it was going to be a big event where everybody got together and signed some documents, but it was just a big email on one day where everybody signed off. There you go. The final bank transfers were made, and lots of money ended up in one account, and then it was done.
Five years after Wonderland's demise, and 700 miles away, Philip Rogers Mallory had founded a fledgling manufacturing empire. PR Mallory and Company manufactured and sold tungsten filaments for electric light bulbs, components for electrical toys and games, and radio parts like batteries and capacitors. By 1929, on the eve of the Great Depression, PR Mallory and Company needed a new administrative headquarters closer to their customers in the West. General Electric, which shared ownership with Mallory of a new company, sold them a 3-story brick building along US 40. In Indianapolis, that was Washington Street.
From the pictures, it was really hard to tell the enormity of that building, but once you step in it, you realize it's 2.5 acres under roof, and it's a big, big building. Citizens Energy Group, they had a map from Mallory. It was hand-drawn, and it showed all the water lines, the gas lines, the underground electric lines. So a lot of the tunnels were there for their on-site infrastructure, but because they had a 10-acre site, they had, I'm guessing a couple miles worth of tunnels between all these buildings.
So we think that's the basement of the boiler powerhouse building.
I'm almost certain of that.
Every other household probably had someone in their direct household or in their family that worked for either RCA or PR Mallory, one of the two. Those were the big, dominant anchor employers for this neighborhood, for the Near East Side.
My connection to Mallory, well, I worked for them for 6 months, and my father worked for them, and also my grandmother worked for them. My dad probably graduated in 1940, 1939 in that area, and was looking for a job. My grandmother gave him a recommendation, and he hired on somewhere in that 1940 range. So that gave him some work experience prior to him being drafted in World War II.
The war and plentiful contracts with the U.S. military gave Mallory reason to expand. Now they covered 2 sites on East Washington Street. At the Washington and Gray site alone, which was Mallory's headquarters, the company grew to a footprint of 8 buildings. Many of Mallory's workforce joined the front lines in World War II, but those left behind stayed busy. Women joined the production lines en masse.
For Mallory, certainly it has been so connected with weapons of war in the past, designing timers and switches for missile systems and bombs, etc.
We did in the basement of the administration building find a very large insulated soundproof room that was actually 2 offices with a lot of telephone space. And these folks, they had a lot of trade secrets, I'm sure. And I'm assuming that that was where private and top secret communications probably did take place because of the amount of telephones and things in there.
In 1942, the Army Signal Corps approached Mallory. They needed a more stable battery for radio communications in the Pacific theater of the war. Inventor Samuel Rubin developed a mercury battery to replace less efficient zinc-carbon ones. That battery was a predecessor to Duracell, Mallory's most successful and longest-lasting enterprise. Even during the war, employee life was bustling. Mallory sports teams competed with other companies. Christmas parties and summer picnics welcomed Mallory families, and love found a way.
My father worked at PR Mallory in management. My mother was his secretary, and they fell in love. They were married in 1945, and my dad continued working for the company till his death in 1955. Probably one of my favorite stories about my dad. He was called into like a business meeting, kind of round table, and whoever the person was leading the meeting wanted to know the most important or impactful moment. Everybody was saying things about work because that's what they felt that they should say. And when it came to my dad, he said it was when my little girl read to me for the first time. You know, he obviously, work-life balance was important to him.
All right, everybody. We got a very special guest with us today. Today's Ronnie's birthday, guys. He's 72. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ronnie. Happy birthday to you.
Mallory had scaled up operations during World War II. Most of their technologies found new uses, though, and they welcomed back employees who'd gone to war.
Dad worked the night shift. He worked from 3:30 to midnight. You know, during the summer, he would get off at midnight, and on Friday night, he'd stop at the pizza place and pick up a pizza for us, and we'd all wait up for him. I remember so many times falling asleep on Dad's lap, and the smell of the factory, it was an endearing smell that allowed me to go to sleep, and it just a memory I'll never forget.
Historian and Mallory employee Doc Taylor once wrote, "There is a good possibility that almost everyone uses a Mallory product or technology every day." From the use of Mallory batteries and hearing aids, to its timers and contacts in household appliances and radios, to its newly pioneered resistance welding, Doc was probably right. But uses for Mallory products weren't just mundane.
To me, the most interesting story is why my dad went to Huntsville, Alabama. That was right at the beginning of this space program being developed. Mallory's put a plant in Huntsville, Alabama to support the space industry. My father's parents were both born in Germany, and he spoke fluent German. And they felt that my dad would be a very good person to be in Huntsville because he could speak German to Dr. Werner von Braun, who was the rocket scientist that came to America from Germany. But we were really just there a few months in 1955. He moved in March of 1955, and then he was killed in June.
As a gift for the thanks of what P.R. Mallory contributed to the Apollo space mission, they gave all these the employees these albums. My dad came and said, "Here, you want this?" And as a probably a 10 or 11-year-old kid, it was like, oh my gosh. So I remember wearing the grooves out of this thing, playing it so many times and thinking, oh, it'd be so cool to be an astronaut.
Apollo 11 completed its voyage, with men and moon rocks safe. And rocket scientist Werner von Braun described his feelings on the historic importance of that event. It was, he said, like the crawling of aquatic life onto land for the first time. Our lifetimes are too short to determine whether or not he will be proved correct. But we are luckier than those generations which will only read about man's first journey to the moon. We have the thing itself, and that in itself is enough.
Many Mallory employees use their time there as a launching pad to greater dreams. Jazz legend Wes Montgomery held down a day job at Mallory's cafeteria as he honed his guitar skills on Indiana Avenue in the early 1950s.
Right out of college, I got a job at Lazarus in Greenwood Mall. A gentleman came in one day. He needed some help buying a pair of pants. I helped him with various different types of pants. He asked me about myself, where I was, where I grew up, what I was doing, working at Lazarus. And then he came back about a week or so later. His name was Richard Williams, Dick Williams, and he was the personnel manager at Mallory. Mallory timers, Mallory capacitors. And he asked me if I'd be interested in going to work there. I, of course, said yes. One thing that has stood out in my mind as an older person is that Dick Williams was pretty bold. I mean, there's this young black woman working in a store. He has no connection to me. And he says, hey, come and work at my company. And I always felt that at Mallory, that there was a sense of inclusion. You never felt separated or unwelcomed or segregated because of your race, or even because of your education, because we had plenty of people who had high school educations, but they were valued just as much as the person who was the engineer, who had, their engineering degrees and then some. I learned a lot in the time I spent actually on the sales floor, because there was so much activity and so much interaction, and everyone got along. Even as corny as it sounds, everyone got along. And if you needed help or assistance or didn't know where to find something, you would just kind of yell across the floor, literally, and someone would say, hey, I know where that is. After about 6-8 months there, Mr. Williams and his assistant, the assistant personnel manager, Jim McGinnis, they asked me if I'd be interested in transferring to the personnel department. The most encouraging thing that both gentlemen did for me was we had to develop an EEOC policy. And Jim and Dick and I met, and they gathered tons of information, and they asked me to kind of whittle that down. And so I worked on it, and I got it together. And after it was done, Jim, I believe it was, said, well, you should go to law school. And Dick said, yeah, you'd be great in law school. My life as an adult really began because these two men who had known me for, a year or two, maybe 2 years, said, you should go to law school. And I did, and it's been wonderful.
My father, my mother, and my brothers all worked at P.R. Mallory's. My mom and dad are both deaf, My dad worked as a turret lathe operator, and I remember some stories where he'd tell that he was running piecework, and they were paying him X amount per part. And so he would run that machine at full blast. And because he was deaf, he didn't hear the machines and the racket it was making. He was just producing parts. And his supervisor would come and tell him, hey, you need to turn that machine down, you need to slow down. And he would tell him, no, I'm on piecework, you need to leave me alone because I'm on piecework and I'm making as many pieces as I can make. I didn't think he had much sympathy for the hearing people when it became piecework time, but at other times he didn't seem to care.
I was the secretary to the Director of Industrial Relations, John C. Michaels, and I was very young, the youngest employee at Mallory's, 17 years old when I came out of high school.
She was working when I walked through the door downstairs, the corner of the building. That was the personnel office. I was hired right there that day and went to metallurgical. And then we'd run into each other in the parking lot several times during that time.
He finally said something in the parking lot. And I think I can remember something like his name being Larry Joe Kerr, and some joke about Joker, I don't know. But then we started dating.
We were married in '60, and we've been married for 60 years.
At the end of their shifts, Mallory employees would flood out of crowded parking lots and onto Washington Street to their homes across the city. Many stopped on their way at local haunts, like the Catalina. But the Mallory campus didn't stop humming overnight. It had 3 shifts running by the 1960s.
I worked with a bunch of guys that had been around here for years. I mean, some of them had started in the 30s. When I started the model shop downstairs, the guys that I worked with there could take their fingers and machines and make anything you wanted, 1 or 2 or 3 at a time. And they were masters at what they were doing.
I was planning on going to college, but my parents weren't volunteering to pay for it, and I wasn't savvy enough to come up with financing. And I graduated and just drifted till September of '76. And my dad came home and said, I got you an interview. It's in the storeroom. I got hired on at in the storeroom and weighing out parts. They moved the powder department into the storeroom, and I was on the ground level of that, and that was not really a good experience because they did not provide adequate safety equipment. I didn't have any masks, and it was tungsten carbide powder, and there was some cadmium powder too involved. I remember going home at night and just coughing up black, just black for a while. And it was in my clothes. My mom was, she'd have to wash my clothes, and she'd complain about the fact that, they were so dirty. But I did some research, and I looked up cadmium powder. And the first thing they said was kidney disease. And boy, howdy, that's what I have. I'm in stage 3 kidney failure. You just never know what things happen in your life, how it's going to affect you in your old age.
By the late 1970s, Mallory was beginning to fragment. Profitable departments, including the battery division, were sold off in a bid to keep the company afloat. In 1978, a group of former employees purchased the back building and continued its operations as a new business. Many employees stayed on at what was now CMW Incorporated, short for Contacts, Metals, and Welding.
And everybody got a raise, so everybody was thrilled. And when the contract came, that's the first thing everybody looked at was, what's my raise? What am I going to make? What am I going to make? Well, the contract took a lot of the union rights away. There was a lot of things in that contract that were just terrible, but they didn't care. I mean, the basic membership didn't care.
When I was leaving for law school in '86, that's when it became obvious that the timers division was really failing. That was the first division to really just bottom out. And it was, of course, due to foreign competition and pricing. Our timers were too expensive. By the time I graduated from law school, which would have been '89, and then into the early '90s, it was pretty much gone, especially here on Washington Street.
I would say the area that may have been when it started declining gradually, the east side has gone down. Now, it was sad for us to see the property in disarray, but if you think of the businesses around here, they depended on the employees here, and there were no more employees. So I think that played a part.
In the 90s and 2000s, the Mallory campus found a range of uses, but its occupants often couldn't afford necessary upkeep on the massive aging buildings.
We're the fourth house from Washington Street, and then so I think I could hit the Mallory building with a baseball from my front yard. I feel like I was still in high school the first time I went over there. It's always just kind of been the biggest building in the neighborhood. That I finally just one day just walked in and was like, hey, I'd really like to walk around this building. And old man Hurt kind of walked me around, and he was turning one whole floor into self-storage, and it was kind of half built.
A family printing business occupied the Brick Administration Building from 1996 to 2007. By the time they moved in, it had been sitting vacant for almost a decade.
Over 7 years, the water lines had busted. It was a nightmare.
The electrical service had been mostly vandalized, and the freight elevators were no longer fully functional.
If they got stuck, I'd have to run all the way to the top of the building and open this door, go in, and there was like a motor that was diagonal across the room and a grate that you've seen 3 stories down. And there was like these 2 switch gears, and I believe there was like some white paint X's on the floor where you had to stand. You put your feet and take 2 broomsticks to push these 2 power at the same time so you could get it to kick on. That was like buying that property was the downfall of our company.
The adjacent cafeteria building housed a church until its roof began to cave in, forcing them to relocate. And CMW continued to cut employees until it finally closed its doors for good in 2013. 2 of the southernmost buildings housed Rehab Resource, a nonprofit social enterprise that sold home improvement materials to small contractors and neighbors.
We started opening up at 7:30 in the morning just for the handyman contractor market. Didn't want to hurt Lowe's or any of the other businesses at all, and it really didn't. We actually got surplus from those retail establishments, relieving them of inventory, providing a secondary kind of outlet, if you will. We provided brand new product. There was a company on Rural, a marble countertop company. When we went there to solicit the materials for inventory, they had a full-time employee working out in the back with a sledgehammer, breaking up marble countertops into a big dumpster. This was his full-time job. What we did is not only got the surplus inventory, but we also provided some additional employment opportunity for the young man so he would not be losing his job as a result of us going in and this is what he did.
Indianapolis's Kepper Institute was born on the Mallory site when its founder's son and grandson needed a way to stay occupied over the summer. Rehab Resource happened to have some downstairs space available, 11,000 square feet of it.
And we were really working with youngsters in social enterprise. What can you offer to the community so that you have that community engagement? And so we got together with the boys and said, how would you all like to own a business? Well, teenagers, early teen, we loved the idea. Okay, it was about call your relatives. Aunt Susie was getting ready to give to a sofa. Could you please let us come and pick it up for our new business? And that's how the Good Stuff thrift store started.
But rehab too was eventually forced from the buildings. In 2009, the EPA shut the facility down after a fire was set to their paint area.
I live on the east side. The years I drove by and just saw the continual ruin and ruin and ruin and ruin, when I knew what had gone on in that building and the activity in that building, and that, you almost want to say, can no one save this? Can no one come up with an idea?
Eventually, as neighborhood organizations began to take a deeper interest in the Mallory campus, just blocks away, Englewood CDC had invested in an indoor farming startup, which was struggling to gain footing.
As with a lot of startups, the model that they had just was not a sustainable model long term. So I actually joined the company back in 2016 personally. Part of the reason for joining was just kind of to reassess for the group, where do we want to go? Do we just need to completely get out of this whole indoor farming industry, or is there an opportunity in this? As a result of that, we decided to shut down the initial operations in 2017. We were at 201 South Rural, which is right across the railroad tracks. And that facility was a little bit too small. Even back in 2015 and 16, the bunker building came up on our radar. And we really felt that it was an excellent location.
Early on in his tenure at Purdue University, President Mitch Daniels and his staff noticed a disconcerting trend. Only a handful of students from IPS, Indiana's largest public school district, were making it to campus each year. They wanted to change that and began conversations with the city, LISC Indianapolis, and Englewood CDC to create a pipeline between IPS and Purdue for students of all backgrounds.
Today, the mayor, the IPS superintendent, and Purdue President Mitch Daniels all came together to announce a new opportunity for inner-city students on the Near East Side. Purdue and IPS are converting the old factory into a new Purdue Polytechnic High School.
At the time, I worked for the John Bonner Neighborhood Center. We have this school started by Purdue that wants to move into the neighborhood and have this STEM-focused high school. The more I heard kind of what they were wanting to do with Purdue, it was exciting, but at the same time, when you know something like this is coming to your neighborhood, you want to make sure that what they say they want to do is actually the thing that they work to do. So when they say we want this to be a diverse school that really tries to get underrepresented populations to West Lafayette, that's exciting. Just becoming the next cool magnet or charter school and a easy way for kids that already have, privileges to get to Purdue, not so cool. It took about 5 minutes to realize, they're pretty serious. And so I think it happened pretty fast. I talked with them like on a Tuesday, and by Thursday I was kind of having to talk to the Bonner Center about leaving and coming to work for here.
The planning process for Purdue Polytechnic High School began in 2016.
We look at our stakeholders. We ask them what they needed from a workforce. If we were to teach any skills to our students to prepare them for the future jobs or college, what would they want us to teach? And so it's not like any other traditional high school. We are challenge-based or project-based. We have passion projects, we have industry projects, and then we have a personalized learning.
Our school does partner with different industries such as Indigo, the Indianapolis Zoo. They present a challenge and us students create a solution in 6 weeks. Something unique. We're not standing or listening to a teacher. We do engage with other students and classmates. We do collaborate. We do think outside the box, and we do heavily communicate with each other.
Traditional students are moved in a cohort. They're told what to do, where to go, what time to go to that. In the industry era, that's what we needed. We needed somebody to go exactly do the same thing over and over to produce this type of product. In the informational age is you have all this information at hand. Then what do you teach your student if they have access to all that information? And for us, what we want our students to be able to do is to take that information and apply it to something, or to provide solutions to complex problems, or to critically think about what to do with that information, not necessarily be able to retrieve that information.
Really, traditional school is great, but it just didn't offer the freedoms that Purdue Polytechnic did. Like, I'd never gotten to make my own schedule before, and I knew that it would prepare me better for college because I got to make my own schedule. And just the opportunity to get directly admitted into Purdue was, you know, big. It's huge.
Many Purdue Polytechnic students live on the Near East Side.
All my life I've been in Indiana. The 17 years I've been in the East Side only. So the Mallory building has always been seen from my perspective, just an old building. And every time I passed near it, I've always wondered what it was going to be, or if it always going to be an empty, old building. Even in our freshman year, the Mallory building was already planned to that being our permanent building. Knowing that we were going to have a permanent location was something ideal for us students.
Purdue Polytechnic leaders originally intended to be in the Mallory building by fall 2018. But over and over, complicated financing and construction pushed the project opening date back.
It has been 3.5 years where we've understood that we want that use for the building, but we've just been trying to pull the financing together, all of the other uses and pieces together, and it's just taken an awfully long time.
It was just an unspoken thing in the bowling household. We're not talking about it because obviously Joe kind of felt this is a big deal. And so they were working their butts off to make sure that happened. But from the time we opened the school, there's always this nervousness in the back of your heads, like, where are we going to go next year? Like, what are we going to do? We're trying to figure out a way to run a school, and we don't have a building. Or we're in a building that's not suitable for high school. But then at the same time, it's like, I only took this job because it's going to be the Mallory building, sort of, right? I mean, it was going to be in my neighborhood. I really wanted to make something happen that would be cool for my neighbors. But then it's just like, man, I'd just rather be in a building. I don't care where we go. Let's just get us a building.
At some point along the way, and I don't remember exactly when it was, Paramount School of Excellence was looking for a place to place a junior high, and that worked really well with Purdue Polytechnic High School, so the whole education center in the administration building kind of came to fruition.
Paramount's interest in the Mallory site really stems from our investment to the Near East Side specifically. So although our kids come from all over the city, I think the leadership team of Paramount Schools has made a intentional decision to be present on the East Side. And a lot of that just comes from like some of the highest need areas in the city. Our executive director, Tommy, had a great conversation with Scott Best over at Purdue Polytechnic, and they had instant like joint interest in potentially creating that pipeline for Paramount students to eventually access Purdue University through Purdue Polytechnic. I think it was like the perfect storm of good situations that kind of lined up between the relationship with Purdue, but ultimately us just ended up at the Mallory site.
I actually look forward to just, exploring the whole building since
Next year I'm gonna be in 8th grade, and then I get to see the first floor in the basement, and then the next year, if I go to Purdue Polytechnic, I get to see the next floor, so I get to explore the whole school.
It's right down the street from my house, so we drive by it pretty much every day, and we walk by it every day. The place it was before, it wasn't as good. It was like, had graffiti on it and all that. Until when we were walking past it, the windows were better. Everything was better, and we were like, whoa. And I was like, they're doing such a good job on it. I was like, that's gonna actually be the school. We went on the field trip. We were on the bus, and they showed us that was gonna be our new school. Everybody was like getting up to see it and stuff. And I was like, yeah.
The third and final tenant on the Mallory campus is Uplift Produce, a new and improved version of the business that started out at 201 South Rural.
We're able to actually bring something to market now, year-round, healthy produce that's literally almost fresh right out of the field. A lot of other farms I've been to, I mean, they're processing stuff in the field, and so there's a lot of environmental things that happen where you have birds flying over the field and stuff like that, and we just don't have that here. We don't have to use pesticides, we don't have to use herbicides, because we're in a completely contained system where none of that is relevant.
This time around, Uplift partnered with Plant Lab, a Netherlands-based farming operation, to install state-of-the-art plant production units in the bunker building.
We'll be harvesting lettuce out of these PPUs, and we'll then be packaging them when we're at full capacity, close to 12,000 pounds per week.
We're sitting right now on 30,000 square feet of a 60,000 square foot floor that we built out the first 30,000, but we have a phase 2 plan pretty much immediately after we get up and running. One of the things I'm excited about is the PR Mallory campus, is the partnership with Paramount and Purdue Polytech. So in our past life, we were able to have kids from high schools come in and help and serve and learn about horticulture. I can see that would be the same case here with folks like Purdue and Paramount, that there's going to be some opportunities just for kids to get around this type of environment and really get an appreciation for it, and potentially continue on into Purdue and get an education in horticulture or agribusiness of some sort.
It's a plus for us that we are going to build the plant production units here in Indianapolis, in this part of Indianapolis in Englewood. So it's nice to know that when it's finished, there are also a few jobs for here inside the community. So that's, for me, that's a plus. So because I see when I walk outside, everybody likes to help you out. Everybody is very friendly. So that's the nice thing for me.
As in the era of PR Mallory, neighbors are beginning to see ways the Mallory site might again become an economic anchor for the neighborhood.
We're glad that they're filling back in with true community-serving uses rather than kind of an innocuous office building or kind of light industrial use. These are really good uses for our neighborhood. There will be teachers that will eat at Tla'oli, and there will be students that will work in our community garden, and there will be new folks that move into the neighborhood. And we're already seeing that. I mean, the last several homes that have been purchased in the neighborhood have probably had some connection to Purdue Polytechnic and Paramount School of Excellence. I don't consider the project complete when the schools move in, and that's just the end of one of the early chapters. I think the story is really the education and the ways Uplift Produce and the two schools use that space and that campus for productive purposes.
There's a wonderful legacy that, hey, we're still going, we're still thinking of, the future. What can we build? What can you make that's going to keep us going into the future?
They often say what you write down, you're more likely to actually get done. So I just wanted to look in this plan and see if we'd actually gotten anything done. So this was done in 2015, and one of the goals around livability was to create a public space at the PR Mallory campus. And then in terms of education, one of the goals was develop a local neighborhood school. Right here.
To have kids rubbing shoulders that are younger, that are seeing Purdue here in the neighborhood, just changes the psychology of a community as to what could be possible, what is possible. And this building is inspiring. For those kids that come into this building, it sends a really powerful message to them about how they are valued, how they are loved, how they are cared for, and what kind of future they can have if they do their part to achieve that.
It's sad when a student's zip code can dictate their academic outcomes, and that's something that we just want to make sure is not the case here for us on the Near East Side of Indianapolis.
We are so excited, man, we are so excited to be a part of this community, and the rich history of this building will allow us to propel us to demonstrate our values of communication, collaboration, and innovation.
James and Abigail and I counted 32 different occasions where this project kind of got off the track. And collectively, you folks, I mean, seriously, a lot of the folks out here helped us problem solve and kind of get through each of those challenges to kind of get to today. So really, really thank you. What I really want to say to each of you is that we thank God for you.
Plants down in Alabama and Greencastle, had a lot of places. Wow. So I would drive sometimes. Sometimes the Mallory had 2 planes.